Mike from Retro Boost. We're going to be talking about the 5X Pro's latest firmware today, but before I jump into it, a couple of quick things. Number one, thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. It is the best way for me to grow the channel, but regardless, I appreciate you being here. Good to have you. Have a seat if you can. It's all good. It's free. I think it's free. I don't know where you are, but it's free here. That's free. Number two, a little bit of history. This has been a very interesting journey for me, this YouTube channel. It started off as a project for entertaining myself during the initial shutdown when COVID-19 first struck, and I was my job at the time had me stay at home, so I had a lot more free time on my hands. I took filmmaking classes when I was younger, didn't do much with it. I've always been a movie and film guy, so I decided to break out those old skills and put them to use, but combine them with my current passion of the day, which is like gaming, like retro gaming. I have a what I consider to be a big console collection. I really enjoy gaming on all platforms, so I put my filmmaking and my gaming love, combined them all to make this channel. What's interesting though is that I had no idea what an expansive universe there was of products and technologies dedicated to improving retro games. I literally didn't know stuff like RetroTINK existed when I first started this channel. I was using a capture card that had analog inputs on it because I had no idea you could get products that accept analog, not just converts them to digital for HDMI, but also processes the picture to make it better for a modern display. That's so cool. I learned that from a local game shop called Video Game World. The staff there were super nice and engaging with me. We ended up having a lot of great conversations, and they educated me on all this stuff. That's how I learned about RetroTINK and CARBY and extron matrix switches. It started off this whole technology journey for me. And the more I mess with it, the better I understand it. And as an aside, my filmmaking skills, as basic as they were when I started, have started to get better. So it's all been a journey of self-improvement, both for me and for my gaming experience. Which brings us back to the topic of today, which is the latest firmware for the 5X Pro. One of my only pseudo-complaints / observations of the 5X Pro in my first impressions was that some of the consoles, in some picture modes, the picture would be kind of askew, or like up and to the right, or parts of it would be cut off. And I could like compensate for some of that by using capture software like OBS, but on a TV, I mean, if it happens there, that's not much you can do about it. Well, I'm happy to say that this firmware update not only addresses that, but adds a host of awesome stuff. Custom scaling and cropping, profiles that can be saved and loaded. It's awesome. The input structure has changed. You no longer have to cycle through inputs one at a time. Now there's a full on-screen menu of which you can customize the size of to best match out whatever resolution or how far away from your TV you sit. The size can match that. It's so great. So we're gonna do three things. Number one, I'm going to do an explanation of the biggest things of these firmware changes. Number two, I'll kind of talk about a couple of little things I flip back and forth on or mess with for a couple of the game consoles, because they're not really set in stone as far as like my profiles go. And then number three, just gameplay examples of where we're at now with this firmware. I'm going to show my particular favorite settings. So, as an aside, it's worth mentioning that with this kind of stuff, there really isn't a right answer. We're in territory that the creators of these games never thought we'd be in, right? So when it comes to the 5X Pro and its host of settings, there's all kinds of things you can do to pursue the most authentic experience possible, but there's plenty of things you can do to just match what you like the most. I kind of float the line between authentic and what I like, and I'm really close to that line. So I'll be showing off the settings that I like the most. If you're not a fan of them, that's perfectly fine. There's tons of other settings you can change to create your perfect experience, and I want to know about it too. There's so much that you can do with the 5X Pro now. I would love to see what settings you all are using for your particular profiles or settings or preferred games or game consoles. I want to know so I can try them, because maybe I'll find something that I like even more, and that would be really cool. The second thing is oh, the cabling. The reason for delaying this video and not making it right when the firmware came out is because I was in the process of upgrading my cabling. So just as I had learned about RetroTINK and CARBY and whatnot for the first time, I also learned about the better quality cabling that you can get for these. So it's been a huge, long, drawn-out process, but I've been able to get HD Retrovision for my Super Nintendo and my PS2, PS3, and Wii. That's right, PS3 is back. We'll get into that one. And Retro Gaming Cable's own shielded component cable for my Sega Genesis. And a SCART cable for PlayStation 1 and my original Xbox, because those are like nice shielded, higher quality alternatives to just straight up composite or component for Xbox. So I've acquired all these cables so I can start maximizing the performance of my setup. It's been a long process, a lot of stuff to tinker with, a lot of stuff to set up. I wanted to wait until it was basically all here before I did this video. The one thing that I don't have yet are that level of cable quality for my GameCube, but it's coming. The Prism cables that are coming out, I have those pre-ordered, and I will be doing a video and probably an updated CARBY versus RetroTINK situation when that comes out. So there's all the updates, news, and things to communicate. Oh, I lied, there's one more. I'm not going to be going over like literally everything that the firmware has to offer, and I don't want to do that specifically because that video already exists. And I don't just want to like carbon copy the same thing over again here, especially considering that this video is co-starring the guy that's responsible for RetroTINK. It's Mike G. So I'll put a link in it below, but on the RetroTINK firmware page for the 5X Pro, there's a video by Mike G and RetroRGB, the YouTube channel. They go over literally everything this firmware has to offer. It's a great video if you really want to learn every single thing that this firmware entails and just the usage of the 5X Pro itself. It's all there for you. I'll link it below. It's awesome. I'm going to go over like the biggest, most obvious changes / the changes that are most important to me and my experience using the product. So here we go. Let's talk about the changes themselves. We'll be using my Sega Genesis with these new component cables I got. So excited. Here we go. So let's take a closer look at what this new firmware update entails for the menu and various new functions. Like I mentioned, I'm not going over every single little thing. If you want to see that video already exists, and it's co-hosted by the creator of the RetroTINK products, no less. It's a great video. I'll include a link to that in my description below, or you can just go right to RetroTINK's website, go to the 5X Pro's firmware page, and that's where it's hosted on the website itself. Very, very cool. So we'll hit the menu button, and the changes are very apparent right away because now here's all the options. Gone are the days of just simply pressing a button to do a function or cycling through inputs, etc. Some of the buttons still work with that said, but this is the biggest change. So right away, I think the biggest thing to call out first are the profiles. We have saving and loading profiles. There are 10 total, plus an 11th default profile. The default profile is a safety feature. Basically, if you were to input a bunch of bad settings and you're not getting picture anymore, just power cycle the device and it loads in the default profile every time. That's a good safety thing to include. I like that. When you're done customizing your experience, though, you can save it to one of these 10 inputs. I'm hoping that maybe down the road we can have some kind of way of labeling them. It's not a big deal, though, because I have a note card. I wrote down what I want, so not the biggest deal in the world. I do kind of wish there were more than 10. I gotta be surprised that I want to use more than 10, but between creating custom profiles for, say, RGB cables versus component or composite, different settings depending on what a game does, I'm finding that I need a lot more than 10, but 10 is a great start. Very cool. So the other big change is how the inputs and outputs work. So you don't have to cycle through the inputs one by one anymore. Now just click the input button, and here's a list, and you can just go directly to what you want. So you no longer have to cycle through them one at a time, waiting for the picture to come back between each going. And the same thing goes for the output resolution modes. Here's a complete list of what I can switch to. 1080p fill is the default one that always loads. 1080p over is becoming my new favorite. That's like the actual 5x upscaling. So 5X is in 5X Pro. That's what that there's for. 1200 is mathematically a 5X increase from 240 at least. But the really cool thing is that for these resolution modes like 1200 and 1440, when you go to select any of these, we get a new message now. If I choose one of them, it'll switch to it, but it will also say, hey, are you sure? And it does that because say that your picture, or your TV, your monitor, your capture thing, whatever, didn't support it, you're not going to get any picture. So instead of being stuck on an input that you can't see, the default option is cancel. So all I have to do is hit cancel, and I go right back. So if you got no picture, just hit the OK button on the remote, and bam, you're back to whatever you had before. Very, very cool. I like that a lot. Now, aside from profiles and changing just how inputs and changes behave, the other really huge feature is the custom scaling and cropping, which is what this third option here is. So this is really cool, and I'm using Genesis because obviously there's some opportunity here to utilize this feature. We got all this blue excess space here and some noise and distortion down there at the bottom, and we can use this new feature to get rid of that. So we can manipulate the picture left or right with the horizontal positioning. So it does what it does there. I can kind of use that to like center it more or less. Secondly, we can manipulate the vertical position up or down. Very, very cool. That's really great for like those select situations I mentioned where PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Wii games were like slightly up and to the left when I was playing them on the 5X Pro. So there's a solution for that right there. Lastly, we can also increase the size. You can increase the size horizontally. I can't imagine a situation where you'd want to do that, but the option is here. You can also increase or decrease the size vertically. Now, this is really handy for messing with certain picture modes, at least for me. And then finally, cropping. Cropping is the easiest way for us to get rid of all this noise and distortion. So I could just crop it right out of the screen. So I can increase my left, I can increase my right, I can increase my top, coming down, and I can increase my bottom. So there, boom, I just cropped out all of the excess, and I have left just the game space. Very awesome. Sega Genesis, NES, and the original Xbox have a lot of situations where this is a very, very cool feature, being able to get rid of all that excess space or recenter it or get rid of the noise or the overscan. So that is awesome. Secondly, fourthly, some of the stuff has moved around. So the interpolation denoising menu is where you find your different filters. So sharp versus medium, soft, and smooth. Medium is actually new. But soft, generally recommended for 3D graphics. Sharp, generally recommended for 2D graphics. Smooth, only situation I found smooth being like noticeably better and worth it for me personally was some PlayStation 1 games and N64 tend to benefit from smooth. Going by the manual, smooth is meant for 480p sources, but I never saw much of a difference with those situations. I published a video on the whole thing. And like the differences are there, but I don't know if they're really like crazy. It isn't as like dramatic and noticeable as like the 2X Pro's smooth filter was, in my opinion at least. But they're all here, very cool. I'm gonna keep it on sharp because that's the best for Genesis. I generally leave the deinterlacer on motion adaptive. Whatever works for you though, whatever you want to do, go for it because again, it's all very customizable. The last big thing that is new is the horizontal sampling. There's a feature here, it's pretty cool. So we have our generic 4x3 and the generic 16x9. Those have been there. There's also the dedicated output modes that mimic the sampling of the original consoles. So the cool thing about turning one of these on, if I go into like say the Genesis one, and then I go back to my scaling and cropping, now we have a new thing down there. If you look at the right side of the menu, there's a percentage of 4x3, and we're at 0.97%. So we're at like 97% the authenticity or range or size rather of true 4x3 aspect ratio. So all I have to do now is manipulate my different values to see what's going to bring me closer. So in this case, it looks like a little bit more horizontal and a little bit less vertical. Boom. Let's move it out a little bit to the center of the screen. And I have just created what is a perfect 4:3 aspect ratio image in the 1080p fill mode. And then we can crop out our noise. Could probably move this over one more there. Get rid of that. One more. That's good. Bring this up to get rid of that noise. And Shazam. So with the new feature, I've created a perfect 4:3 image, mimicking the sampling of the Genesis, and it's the 1080p film mode. And there we go. So custom scaling and cropping, very, very cool. The excess is gone, the noise is gone, and the image has been better tailored. Now, if none of this interests you or you just want to turn it on and go, obviously you can. It's completely customizable. Or if you were like, I would have done that differently, well, then do it differently. There's tons of things you can do. Like I mentioned before, there is no right answer here. This is all however you want to tailor your experience. One thing I will show, though, is kind of the final result of what I like to mess around with. This is 1080p fill. I kind of created my perfect situation for me with one of my custom profiles here. Number 7 is my Genesis one. So here we go. This is my ideal situation here. So this is the 5X mode. It's 1080p over. We got things cropped and scaled. So this is what I like the most here. Again, whatever you want to do, you do you. This is what I like here the most, the 5X mode with custom scaling to get rid of some of that noise. This is my favorite here. It is in the Genesis sampling mode, so we're getting like the same sampling as the original console would have given it, so there's a flavor of authenticity to it, but you know, do what you want to do. So that's kind of the basics of what this firmware has in store. A lot of the other stuff is the same. It's just it's in a new menu now, so you can find it in a different spot. There are other changes they made. Like there was a lot of new stuff done for scanline generation. I've never been much for scanlines, but if you are into that sort of thing, like CRT emulation, you're going to definitely love what's been added in regard to the scanline features. It's so much more customizable now. It's pretty nuts. That's covered in pretty great detail in the video that I mentioned before that's available on RetroTINK's website / YouTube too. It's a co-production between Mike Chi and the YouTube channel RetroRGB. So very, very cool stuff. Hope you found this informative. Next thing we'll do is just kind of go down the list and kind of show what I've created with my various consoles with this new firmware, and in some situations, new cabling in consideration. So thanks for listening. If this is the end of the video for you, have a good rest of your day. If you want to see more console demonstrations, stay tuned and we'll get to that next. Now that we're up to speed on the basics of what this firmware has to offer, before I show the gameplay demos like I've done for videos in the past, I want to explain a couple of the consoles real quick first. So, as I showed, there's a lot of different things you can utilize as far as the picture experience goes, the various output modes, the various horizontal sampling modes, etc. So, my particular favorite nowadays is to use the 5X over mode, well not 5X, the 1080p over mode, which is a 5X scale. That is the 5X in 5X Pro, that mode right there basically. So that's my preferred mode now that I can manipulate the picture, because it does cut off the top and bottom. It's supposed to do that, it's part of it simulating a CRT experience, but for some games it does cut off like too much of the play area for my personal preference, like say Ninja Turtles for example on SNES. So I prefer to do 5X, I keep saying 5X, I prefer to do 1080p over and then shrink it vertically to more fit it to the screen. That's what I like. Again, if you don't prefer that, then don't do it. It's fine. There's other modes you can do. You don't have to crop it or scale it. That's just what I prefer and what I think looks the best to my eyes. But it's all up to you what you want to customize because of how flexible this firmware is. So that's what I use for most Most everything nowadays is that. With a couple of these consoles, though, I haven't quite decided what horizontal sampling modes I like. I could go either way on a couple. So, Super Nintendo, I think I like the actual SNES mode. I think it looks really cool. It's definitely got that Super Nintendo flavor on there. Switching it to generic 4x3 is fine, but I think I prefer the other way around, whether that be using component cables or RGB, either way. Now, PlayStation 1, I think I actually prefer generic in this situation. Once again, there is this like really cool kind of style and flavor to the PlayStation output mode, especially when you use higher quality cables, like I'm using RGB for this example. I think it's like, yeah, that's PlayStation. You look at this and you go, yep, that's Sony PlayStation right there, 100%. But I think 4x3, although it takes away some of that flavor, I prefer the added clarity and just overall presentation that you get from the 4x3 mode. Again, my preference. Could go either way. Lastly, I use mostly 4x3 for everything now. So when I did my first impressions video, I believe, if I remember correctly, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Wii, I did all in widescreen format, which I liked at the time, still do. But with the new firmware and the new settings, I think I prefer 4x3 for most situations now. So Xbox and PS2, I'm using 4x3 now most of the time. Xbox in particular is now a SCART cable, by the way, so it's RGB. Quality-wise, it's pretty similar to what I had before. I was using component cables before. I just went to a shielded RGB cable, which quality-wise, component RGB, pretty similar. I just wanted to see if the shielding would make much of a difference, and since this is a relatively short cable run, it was already a component. The difference isn't night and day, but it was a very affordable RGB cable, which is that's nice. For Wii, although I'm doing 4x3 now, I could go either way for Wii. I think Wii looks fine either way. Personally, I've tried both, but 4x3 is what I landed on just for simplicity's sake and consistency's sake. Lastly, I did note a couple of color issues with brightness, in particular with green. And this happened both on PS2 to a higher degree and Wii to a lesser degree. Playing Jak and Daxter on PS2, the greens are like really bright and like oversaturated. I'm not really sure what the proper term is for it, but they're starting to get like washed out basically. They're just so bright. I'm not sure why. The only thing I can think of is maybe it's some kind of issue with the cable. It's a new cable compared to before, and I don't recall that being a problem before. It could be, or it's a side effect of me using the 5X over mode with all the little changes I made. I can entertain either option. Who's to say? The easiest fix I could find was just lowering the gamma 1 or 2 steps, and it seems to have fixed it and make the picture fine. PlayStation 2 can look pretty different depending on what kind of games you run it to. Like Jak and Daxter versus like say Metal Gear Solid 2, there's like a definite like sharpness difference. I really like how Metal Gear Solid 2 looks, whereas Jak and Daxter like wasn't as clear or defined. So it's interesting how game to game this stuff can look different. You got to keep that in mind for your settings too. Sometimes different games can have different things happening. So just wanted to notate all that real fast. Little things here and there. Again, it's so customizable, so there's a lot you can do with it. But now I'll show just gameplay demonstrations here. I'll show befores and afters, like where I was in the first impression, and then fade into what I have now. I'm not doing comparisons because it's not really worth comparing this kind of stuff. It isn't that kind of situation. It's just kind of where I was then, where I am now. Just so we'll go through all the consoles and then we'll wrap up afterward.
Let's go! Here we go! Whee!
Snake, go through that door into the ship's interior. Push the action button down in front of the door and wait until the door opens before letting go. If you need to open the door faster, hit the action button repeatedly while you turn the handle. Make sure you keep doing it until the door's open.
Mecha Godzilla versus Godzilla 2000. Monsters, fight!
Concentrate fire on Godzilla. Monster in range. Fire at will. Concentrate fire on Mega King Ghidorah.
Mothra airstrike!
All hands, report to battle station.
Wo bist du denn?
Rock and roll, baby, rock and roll. That sucker didn't even stand a chance. You ready for the next challenge now?
Talk about this! Come on! Come on!
I hope that this was helpful, kind of seeing what I do with it. Maybe I'll give you some ideas. Again, I want to know what you all are doing with it. What are your preferred settings? What do you do for given games or game consoles? I would like to know. So very cool. That's everything right there. As far as the updated cabling situations go, I am planning a video specifically about that. So stay tuned. We'll go over like the HD Retrovision cables I got, the retrogamingcables.uk, compared to what I had before across the 5X Pro and 2X Pro family. It's gonna be a huge video to make, but I am gonna do it. And then down the road, that Prism component cable coming out for the GameCube. Oh my gosh, an affordable component cable for GameCube. What's going on? That'll be a video too. So stay tuned for all that. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you can be notified of that when it comes out. Subscribing is also the best way to help me grow the channel too. I sincerely appreciate it when it happens. But regardless, I appreciate you watching. So that's everything there. 5X Pro's newest firmware update. Very impressive. Adds a ton of stuff. I love what they added. It really makes the experience whole now. It's amazing the journey, the growth that the 5X Pro has been going on. I love the consistent maintenance and additions to it. And I look forward to what the future holds. So, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.